The world was in complete chaos. People ran from robbers. Crooks and burglars beat up cops. Vandals threw trash cans through store windows. Inside Volanus' castle was a large metal door. A thermometer beside it on the wall read -30 degrees. The door opened. A thick, icy cloud spurted out from behind it. A dark figure moved through the cloud and closed the door. It was Volanus. Slick walked up to him as Volanus stepped into the hall. "What you doing, Dad?" "Just taking one final look at our superhero friends before they're gone forever," Volanus said gleefully. On the side of the door opposite the thermometer was a digital clock. Above the clock, a sign read, "No more superheroes in 5924, 5923, 5922," as the clock counted down. Outside the castle, Duncan and the grounds crew slowly swept for signs of plants. The Superflaws hid in the distance behind a few large boulders. Squirrel informed them, "All right, they're almost done. Soon the castle door will open and they'll go inside. Then it will be sealed for the day. We need someone to sneak in and unlock the door to let the rest of us inside." "It's up to you, George," said Chester. George looked at Chester and Squirrel. "But I can't see when I'm invisible. I'll bump into things and they'll know I'm there." "That's why we bought you these," replied Squirrel, scurrying up to George and handing him a transistor radio which was small enough to fit into his ear. "Put this in your ear." After George did so, Squirrel handed him a mini camera. "Wedge this over your ear." George obeyed. Chester looked him over. "All right, let's do it. Squirrel, you're the only one who can risk being seen, so you guide him." Squirrel held a second radio in his paw and leapt onto the top of a boulder. While George made himself invisible, Squirrel pulled out a small video screen that linked to the mini camera. The door to the castle slowly opened to let in Duncan and the grounds crew, who had finished their sweep. Invisible, George quickly followed behind them. Watching the video screen, Squirrel used the radio to give George directions. "All right, keep going straight ahead. Nice and easy, nice and easy. You're doing great." As the last two members of the grounds crew filed through the castle door, George bumped into one of them. "Hey, who bumped into me?" "You're imagining things. Ow, someone just stepped on me." "Will you two quit clowning around and get in here?" yelled Duncan. The three men scurried inside as the door closed behind them. Inside the castle, the last of the grounds crew walked out of sight. The front hallway was empty. George waited until he heard Squirrel tell him through the radio, "All right, they're all gone. Unlock the door. Lower, lower. That's it." The door unlocked. Chester, Lisa, Julie, Praying Mantis, and String Bean rushed out from behind the boulders and hurried to the castle door, staying low to the ground. George became visible as the door opened and his friends entered. "Come on, it's this way," directed Squirrel. The others followed as Squirrel scampered down the hall. They hurried through a maze of hallways and up several different stairwells. When they came into one hallway, Squirrel had them slow down and move cautiously. "There's often someone on guard in this area," he informed them. Suddenly, Slick turned a corner and saw the Superflaws. "Hey!" he shouted and sounded an alarm on the wall. George yelled, "Run!" and all seven Superflaws ran to a door on the far side of the hall, opened it, and rushed inside, slamming the door behind them. The Superflaws looked around the room. They were at the top of a tower in a huge room made entirely of stone. There were some small tables, a few chairs, and a couple of unlit logs and a fireplace. Otherwise, the room was empty. A single arc-shaped window overlooked the barren landscape outside. They could hear the alarm ringing in the hallway. "There's no way out!" screamed Lisa. "They'll be coming soon," warned Chester. Suddenly they heard the sound of running feet. The sound got closer and closer. "Julie, if you ran as fast as possible, could you knock a bunch of people out by bumping into them?" asked Chester. Lisa snickered. "What?" asked Chester. "That's how she meets boys," replied Lisa. Julie blushed. "Sure, I can run fast, but I can't change direction. I'll hit the wall and stop cold." Chester pointed at String Bean. "String Bean, stretch yourself along the wall." String Bean grabbed onto the doorway and pulled himself up off the ground sideways. He stretched. Volanus's army of henchmen could be heard outside the door. "How many will there be, Squirrel?" asked Chester. "A dozen or so, all armed and all very strong." String Bean's body was stretched nearly around the entire room. He stopped his feet at the other side of the doorway so that he was not blocking the door. Chester continued his instructions. "Everyone but Julie, lie down on top of each other. Hold on to each other tight." They obeyed. Outside the door, they could hear Slick giving his own set of instructions. "All right, boys, here we go. My dad is on his way. On three. 1." Chester picked everyone up and raised them over his head. Slick continued to count from outside the door. 2. Chester leapt onto a table in the middle of the room. 3. The door flung open and all the criminals entered. They looked around, confused at seeing Chester standing on a table holding nearly everyone up over his head. Chester yelled, "Now, Julie, run!" Julie ran as fast as she could. When she hit String Bean, the curve of his body curved her run. She simply ran along his body as though on a racetrack. "Tighten your body, String Bean," instructed Chester. String Bean gradually pulled his body in more and more, tightening the circle around Volanus's men. Julie ran into one of them, throwing him from the circle and sending him crashing to the floor, unconscious. Soon she was running into a man every second, each time sending the crook flying from the circle and crashing unconscious onto the floor. Tables and chairs also flew out of the circle as Julie crashed into them. As the circle got smaller, Chester leapt off the table. He jumped over the stretched String Bean, landing on the far side of him so as not to get hit. Just moments after Chester jumped, Julie hit the table on which he had been standing. When the circle tightened all the way around Julie, it stopped her momentum. She stopped motionless and Chester lowered everyone to the floor. The Superflaws all cheered as String Bean returned to his normal shape. "Great job, everyone! Great job!" encouraged the now very enthusiastic Chester. Slick stood outside the door, looking at Chester. I know you." "Yeah, I know you too," said Chester. "And remember what I told you? Crime doesn't pay." Slick sneered. "We'll see what my father has to say about that." He entered the room and touched a button on the wall. A small door in the ceiling opened and a heap of feathers fell on top of Chester, knocking him off his feet to the floor. He lay under the feathers, unable to move. Before Julie and Lisa could reach Chester to help him, Slick grabbed each of them and banged their heads together, knocking them dazed to the floor. Next, Slick tried to grab George. But before he could do anything, Praying Mantis leapt to the wall, snatched Slick, and wrapped him in a silk cocoon. He dropped Slick to the floor just as Volanus entered the room. Well. It seems I underestimated you," observed Volanus. George brushed the feathers off Chester, allowing him to stand up. Volanus checked his watch and said, "You have just 9 minutes to save the superheroes." "Squirrel, let's do it!" George yelled as he turned invisible. Volanus lunged for him. "I don't think so." He grabbed hold of George and shook him until he became visible again. When Volanus released him, George fell to the floor, dazed. Julie jumped up to try to get Volanus. Before Julie could reach him, Volanus began to spin around incredibly fast, turning into a whirlwind. When Julie reached the wind, she was sent flying across the room, where she smashed into the far wall and crashed to the floor. As Volanus stopped spinning, he told the group, "Ah, yes, not quite all the Superflaws were arrested. For you see, I, too, am a Superflaw." Chester and his friends stood with their mouths open, shocked. "But," Volanus wagged his finger at the group, "you don't know my flaw. My secret is safe, and that gives me the advantage." Praying Mantis retorted, "Advantage, manage." He shot a spray of silk on Volanus and started to wrap him. Volanus spun in the opposite direction of the spinning silk. As Volanus became a whirlwind again, the silk began to wrap around Praying Mantis, spinning him into a tight cocoon that fell to the floor. Volanus stopped spinning. "Why you want to save the superheroes, I have no idea. They never gave us the time of day, none of them. No use for us flaws. Let's finish this, shall we?" He spun again into a whirlwind. String Bean charged Volanus, but his body merely flew around outside the whirlwind, stretching uncontrollably. Abruptly, Volanus stopped spinning and String Bean was thrown against the wall. Lisa flew toward Volanus. He spun into a whirlwind again. Lisa was sucked into the wind. Volanus mocked her. "Need help landing? Here, let me!" He threw her from the whirlwind and she slammed into the wall. Enough of this nonsense. Finally Chester acted, raising his fist and walking straight into the whirlwind. Bam! The whirlwind ended, and this time it was Volanus who flew across the room and into the wall, knocked silly by Chester's punch. "George, go save the superheroes." "You got it, Chester." George ran out of the room. Julie pulled the silk off Praying Mantis. "You okay?" Praying Mantis nodded. Volanus went to the door and closed it. He grinned evilly and said to the group, "Your friend won't save the superheroes in time. But you won't need to worry about that. Prepare to meet your doom."